Okay. Well, I share this over to TruthCom page. So,
okay, my name is Alex Suarez, and I'm an author and an activist. We're Tome, Florida. I also happen to be a student at FAU. I'm a member of the House of Representatives, student government, and I work with Michelangelo Hamilton, Tim Canova, and several other local activists and political progressive figures in campaigns and in movement building. And my current book is about a new movement that's emerging now out of the campaign. So I wanted to discuss that book that I'm currently working on and the ideas that have emerged from that, and things that we've been working on here in South Florida.
Okay.
Hello there.
Hi. Do you have video?
I do not know, actually. It's been a while since I've had to actually use it.
Okay, well, I'm going to let Al continue for a bit because I want to hear a little bit more about the book he's working on now. And he wrote a book about Occupy movement and many other books, actually. So, and very cool, he has interviewed Noam Chomsky. So I'd love to hear more about that.
A program out of Blog Talk Radio back in 2012, about a year after Occupy, a year after I met Chomsky. I got to interview him. Talk about the post-Occupy analysis, and so that was shortly before I published my first book, which was in 2013, called "Solidarity Forever?" The struggle of an occupier. So it talked about where's the solidarity today, what the struggles that we went through, the different aspects of the movement. But primarily, what I wanted to talk about this evening was revolutionary libertarianism. So. What's emerged from Tim Canova's campaign? Canova is a commanding figure who unites people. And having worked from inside his campaign, we had a lot of different groups. I'm not going to name names, but we had a lot of different groups that tested each other, but that all came together under one roof. Literally, they all came together at the headquarters of Canova to work for the common cause that we were fighting for. And a lot of these people that emerged were independents, libertarians, former Republicans. It wasn't just socialists or progressive Democrats. That's another thing. There's talk of people like Jesse Ventura and Jill Stein running again on the libertarian ticket in 2020. And it's interesting because the Democrats always like to say a vote for a Green Party candidate, and I voted for Jill Stein twice, but they always say that a vote for a Green Party candidate is a vote for the Republican. How are they going to say that when most of the people that vote for Libertarian candidates are Republican? If anything, that would be a vote for the Democratic candidate. But I think that we need a new party. It has to be done democratically, and it can't be hierarchy. If there are candidates that I support that are happy to run in the Libertarian Party, even though I've tended to vote Green, I'm willing to vote for them as well because I'm an independent. I'm not a partisan to any party. But anyways, the idea behind the book, Revolutionary Libertarianism, is trying to start a new movement or a new philosophy based on the philosophy of unity on the United Front and having different groups work together for common aims and no longer letting ourselves be divided on labels. To work for that new society that Canova was fighting for against the machine, against the voter machines and the rigging and Wasserman Schultz and the Clinton mob down here in South Florida. So we're continuing that struggle, and hopefully this book, whenever it comes out next year, can help inspire people and activists to work together through that struggle, whether on college campuses or on the streets or wherever it needs to be taken.
Well, what you said about oops, our sound, we might have had a problem there. What you said about labels is so true. The work I've done all of this year has been with 2 different organizations that had candidate contracts, and Tim was our most well-known, well, he's probably the most well-known progressive fighting election fraud and for election integrity in the country, which Bernie didn't do. But anyway, yeah, he signed both of our contracts, and the whole point really with both CFAR and CWAC were to get rid of those labels and just get people to look at like what these candidates are for. And we did have mostly Democrats, but a lot of independents, a lot of Greens, and kind of near the end I talked to, I think it was 2 different libertarian. Yeah, not necessarily libertarian socialist, but a Maine libertarian, which is a different animal, I think. A Northeast.
Well, it depends where you are geographically.
Right, right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
The libertarians in the United States and Latin America, they've kind of changed the meaning of that name, and they've been right wing on certain issues. But libertarians, certainly in Europe, are more Chomsky-like libertarians.
Interesting. Yeah, I would love to get into that.
First.
Yeah, I want to get into that because I think, I don't know a lot about libertarianism. Of course, I think most of us think of Rand or Ron Paul. And
Ron Paul endorsed Joe Stein and Cynthia McKinney. So if Ron Paul is such a right-winger, why has he endorsed two Green Party candidates for president? So I'm not sure about Rand, but Ron certainly wants to unite with certain progressives. He made that clear many times.
Well, there are definitely things that we can agree on. We've always, I think, been able to agree on, less war, getting out of the wars and defunding the military-industrial complex. But I find for myself, a lot of stuff, what I hear from not libertarian socialists, which maybe we can get into explaining the difference there, but just what we know as traditionally libertarians, seems like they really want no government. And so while I find myself agreeing with half of it, please correct me if I'm wrong, but then I find like they want to defund, education and stuff, and it's just all kind of a free-for-all.
If we could define the economic system of the United States, I believe it should be called a corporatocracy. That means the merger between the government and the corporations. So there's not one common enemy, there's two, both the corporations and the government, how they've been infringing on our rights, on our civil liberties.
Yes.
So Mussolini said that he wanted to rename fascism corporatism because ultimately the goal of fascism, and he was the founder of fascism, was to merge the state with the corporation. Of course, never in Mussolini's wildest dreams would he have seen to what level it is in the United States with corporate personhood. Corporations right now actually have more rights than people. If an individual destroyed a Gulf like BP did, they wouldn't get off with a fine. They would go for life, maybe even the death penalty.
And I think one of the scariest partnerships...
more rights than people now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the scariest partnerships of that, and then I'm going to let you two get into debate here, but is the voting machine manufacturers now partnering with our government and DHS and doing all this behind closed doors. I think this is going to become the issue, or already has been. But if we don't have,
for example, when Snowden revealed, what the government was doing, he was working for a corporation at the behest, of course, of NSA and the CIA.
Right.
But even our intelligence agencies outsourced to corporations and use them as front groups to do espionage. And I believe we have another guest is a revolutionary socialist. If he is, then there's nothing for me to debate him on when it comes to politics, because that's basically my philosophy as well. What I'm trying to do with revolutionary libertarianism is unite. It's not to deviate from people's beliefs as libertarians, but it's to bring about a revolutionary, more revolutionary stance to implement those civil liberties and the common enemies, not enemy, both what the corporations are doing to our society and what government's doing to our society. The role of government, whether you want to call it big government or not, the role of government should be minimal. That's my belief. Basic needs, healthcare, education, but the government shouldn't have a right to tell us what to do and infringe on our basic civil liberties and our civil and human rights, which the U.S. government has been doing. They've been trying to prevent revolution from within. They've been trying to pacify the masses, control the media. And we have to counter that narrative. And we have to build a movement, which is much more important than a political campaign, which is only temporary. And Tim Canova understands that. I, for a reason, dedicated this book to him that I'm working on now, because I think he's an inspiring leader. And he's brought people, different groups that we would never dream of working together, but we all work together because that's what leaders do. They unite people. Leadership's important. And during Occupy, that was a mistake that we made, that there was a lot of discouraging of leadership. You do need leadership, but you don't want to have leaders worshipped and there to be false prophets and, people infiltrating and taking over the movement and bringing it in a course that it wasn't supposed to initially go to. And if historically you've seen that, right? The French Revolution, the Jacobins, then the rise of Napoleon, which flied in the face of everything that the original revolution was supposed to be. You could make the same argument with Stalin in Russia. But the point is, You don't want the false prophet to come and ruin the movement. But at the same time, why discourage leadership? There should be leadership, but it should be leadership that's done democratically. And as Chomsky says, you have to have authority that's justified. So if authority doesn't justify itself and just continues on with no question, that opens it up for tyranny.
So how do you speak to maybe your classic libertarian? And then why don't you jump in here if you have video there, do you?
Unfortunately, I cannot find my webcam right now.
Oh,
I know
that's okay.
I know it's working
that's
because
okay.
I still have audio.
All right.
I don't know
where to introduce yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I find myself in agreement with a lot of what Al had to say. I would add that, at least from a libertarian socialist standpoint, that one of the big things that we tend to highlight when we discuss our perspective of the world around us is that it kind of we tend to find actually a lot of agreement with libertarians in the sense that we agree that corporations have a systemic relationship with state power. Now, the funny thing is that in our analysis of what happened in Soviet Russia, one of the things that happened very early on, even before Lenin kicked the can, was that they began to collectivize, hold all the capital that they had taken over from the rich people in Russia, those that were linked to the Tsar, and they reconverted it into industries that they personally controlled. And so what was the original goal of the Soviet Union, which arguably would have continued under Trotsky, unfortunately we won't know that. But the original idea was that essentially that the workers themselves would hold individual councils that would govern the individual industries, in which they could elect representatives to meet at a larger council.
By the way, what was your name? And you're a teacher, right?
Yes. Real name is Cosmo, and I'm a teacher in Midwest City.
Okay, so I'm just curious. When you said Lenin earlier kicked the can, what did you mean by that specifically?
So before Lenin passed, and the
okay. Now I know what you meant. Okay.
What was the original plan? At least this is my understanding, especially with Trotsky, was that they wanted to have it under councils, which and those councils would elect representatives to go to the larger union.
That's what Soviet means. Soviet means council.
Yeah, that was the original concept. What ended up happening, though, is that Lenin had begun to take over the workers' councils and basically abandoned the idea about about half the way through. And Stalin...
13 invading armies. There was an embargo. There was a civil war, that was financed from abroad, backed by 13 armies, going into Soviet Ukraine, and then getting into Russia itself.
Well, yeah.
You have to understand the context of what was going on from 1917 till the end of the Civil War. They could have had the intentions to have the Workers' Council be autonomous, but you had all those factors that put pressure on them to intervene directly, because Marx wanted the government to wither away. I don't want to get too off topic, but I think that the intention of a lot of Marxists are the same as the anarchists. The difference is in how they go about it. But certainly the state should wither away, and there should be workers' councils or Soviets to represent the people directly. But the question is when you do it. And if you have a civil war in your hands and other countries intervening into your country, you might have to have emergency measures to deal with it. I think that's what Lenin was trying to do. What Stalin did was capitalize on that and try to make those measures permanent to make a dictatorship. Not a dictatorship of the proletariat, the dictatorship that resulted in a tyrannical regime, which was the Stalinist regime.
Which ended up persisting for well past Stalin's reign. The key part from our perspective, the libertarian socialist perspective, is just that when traditional socialists and libertarian socialists look at that, they thought with a lot of socialists tend to look at that as sort of an unfortunate mishap of what of a revolution gone awry. We tend to look at it as a natural consequence of attempting to centralize leadership around the small, complicated people.
The vanguard.
What's happening is that because Lenin's circle was so tight, it left a power vacuum that was sufficient for Stalin to walk through. And after Trotsky failed to upset Stalin's power grab sufficiently, things fell into what would ultimately be the natural state. So when we talk about the relationship between state and power, well, the reason why we don't often go with let's say libertarian capitalist solutions, our contention is that because the same kinds of powers that led the Soviet Union to essentially lead into a state capitalist dictatorship would, if you manage to take capitalism without the state, what ends up, you get results somewhat similar to the Soviet Union.
Well, Chomsky said that anarcho-capitalists are ultimately
for
corporate tyrannies, right? So to me, it's a contradiction. If you call yourself an anarcho-capitalist or even a libertarian capitalist, there's a lot of contradictions there.
Yeah. So it's sort of like you knock one beast and then you let the other take its place, and that's always been our biggest concern, at least with the libertarian, and especially with the anarcho-capitalist model of state and
but the point of my book that I'm working on now is and I respect labels and I respect history and everything, but we can't let that divide us as well. There's a time to debate like the particularities of a certain philosophy, and that's more of a role for academia. But there's also a time to put the pay differences to the side and work for the common cause. Mm-hmm. And that's what the idea of revolutionary libertarianism is about, is to implement a new movement that is unifying, that can see that we have common enemies. And I'm sure you can agree with that. Both the corporations and their incredible power they have in this country, infringing on our rights, and the government working at the behest of those corporations.
So I would probably agree with that assessment for the most part. Again, the details, it's the fine details that will probably that are the things that I'd be most concerned about before agreeing to such an alliance. Now, that's not to say that I think that people are going into this in bad faith. It's just that there's a certain degree of assurances. The one thing I've learned from 2016 is the folly of going in without a plan and without some assurances of what we can and can't afford to take.
Now, I'd like to talk about the media for a minute, because that's
that's also the big part.
I mean, that's one of my areas I care about the most. I was a journalism major, and I remember back in the 90s learning, I can't remember what it was then, but it was like 14 or something corporations owned everything. And now, I don't know.
Was it journalism or communications?
Well, more communication. It was a small school, UNCA, so it was communications with the concentration.
Are dropping their journalist departments and going for communications. The communications like 90% journalism, and then like 5% diplomacy, 5% marketing, something like that. Mm. But pure journalism isn't really taught much in universities anymore. Investigative journalism is dying off.
Yes.
And I see that's problematic. But I'm mostly concerned about the media, in particular the corporate media, and the level of selling out that they've done, and the deceiving of the masses. But they're not deceiving you, right? Look at the figures. CNN, Nielsen said pretty recently that the average age was like somebody 65. Or Fox was even higher, 66. So you have older people that are watching the I call it the lamestream press, but they're watching the lamestream news or reading the lamestream press, and the majority, the Nielsen ratings show this, are older people. The youth are no longer watching this stuff. The youth are still getting informed, but they're getting informed by going on RT, by going on Telesur, by going on YouTube, going on alternative channels where they can get another view, perhaps more truthful view. And that's, I think, is inspiring that the youth are largely ignoring the corporate media and mock the corporate media and can see through the lies and the propaganda now.
And I think we have to think, whatever you think of Bernie now, that campaign and what happened in 2016 and seeing that in the media and what they were showing and, not showing what was really happening on the ground, showing Trump's empty, or an empty podium waiting for Trump instead of showing Bernie's rallies. I think that really became clear to a lot of us that couldn't see it before.
Let me ask you something. Why do you think investigative journalism is dying off?
I think that it's just money has taken over too much. I mean, look at someone
That's why we need whistleblowers, right?
Right,
because
exactly.
We're now doing the job of investigative journalists. I interviewed Captain Ray Lewis about this. I'm sure you heard of him. He was a former police officer arrested in uniform at Occupy. He's an activist, and he's exposed for the past 20 years the hiring practices of police. And of course, for you to be a detective, you had to first been a street cop. Number one, you have to have a low IQ. I mean, that's just given. And number two, you have to be insensitive. They give you a sensitivity test as well. So it's not so much that they just come in and they're racist, but a lot of them are just brutes. They have no sensitivity, they have low intelligence, and this is the cops that they've been hiring, and then they become detectives, and your IQ rarely changes. And so when there's a murder case, I'm not even saying it has to be political, but when there's a murder case, they're relying on investigative journalists because the detectives are doing a bad job. But when you have the investigative journalists dying out, and nobody's studying to be an investigative journalist anymore, and then you have these detectives that are doing a crappy job at cases, then you have increased injustice. So I see that it's all related. We need investigative journalists to cover, cases such as murder or an injustice done or police brutality. And of course, also in politics to expose corruption at the local or state level.
Well,
and
throughout
there to be more investigative journalism, but people feel discouraged because they feel intimidated.
Well, I can tell you, during 2016, during the primary, my daughter was taking a gap year. She graduated high school year early, and she was preparing to go to Boston University to study journalism. And she watched with me.
That's where Howard Zinn used to teach.
I know. I couldn't believe what she was reporting from there. I kept saying, go to your professor and say, have you heard of Howard Zinn before? But she wasn't quite as ballsy as me about it. So we watched everything that was happening, and I kept saying to her, God, what are they teaching at journalism school? Surely they must be, I'm sitting here watching CNN and the debates, and everything seems canned and just it's fake. And I thought,
every single law, media, and political class should be in the syllabus 1984. They should read Orwell. They should read, this literature. Of course, they want to avoid Orwell at all costs, but the way, things are taught now, there's so many books that would be so helpful to them. Most of what I learned is self-taught. People ask me, like, oh, what class did you take to learn about that? It's like, I didn't take any. They wouldn't teach that in college.
No, there's a great site, speaking of Howard Zinn. Have you heard of the Zinn Education Project? I think it's Zinn EDU. Yeah, started to get my teenager reading some of that. But anyway, so my older daughter went to BU, and this was during the election, and she left. She had a great merit scholarship there, and she said, I can't do this, and she's left the country now. But she was ridiculed in class for...
Is she in Europe?
Yep, she's in Scotland. But she was ridiculed by a professor. Like, she was kind of attacked by the class when she would say something that was, anti-Hillary. And they're like, you're a Trump supporter. And she ended up not voting. But no, she wasn't at all. But also we're not originally from the South, but coming from North Carolina, they just instantly labeled her because you're going against what we're saying. And she just felt ganged up on. And I said, Throw it in their faces.
When that happens, I just tell them who I support. I'm an open book. I say, well, I'm going to vote for Jill Stein. And they say, who's that? And a lot of them look into her. But there was countless libertarians that were completely disgusted with Johnson. And they just ran into the arms of Jill Stein, literally. So, you know, so just because, you know, Greens were at one time comprised of mostly former Democrats, now you have a lot of libertarians or even former Republicans that are supporting Greens. So just like I said earlier, I think we weren't recording when I said this, but, you know, like if Jesse Ventura runs as a libertarian in 2020, I'll probably vote for him. And that's me coming from the left. But, you know, so for them, the Democrats to blame people, oh, we'll vote for libertarians or vote for Republican. No, if anything, it's the other way around. So you have this shaming, this voter shaming. You know what? If we're in a real democracy, you should be able to vote the way you want. You know?
It's all Susan Sarandon's fault or something, right? I mean,
or Ralph Nader. I mean, Ralph Nader had a lot of support from celebrities.
He was my first vote.
Donahue, you know, well, speaking of Donahue, you know, that was another journalist that was thrown out of the media for coming out against the Iraq War. That's why investigative journalism, as of the early 2000s, started to fade away. Because you have countless journalists that were thrown out, like Rick Sanchez and then Mark Lamont Hill. But Rick Sanchez is on RT now. So was Larry King. So you have these known American journalists that were forced into early retirement or thrown out of CNN for their views, and now they're on RT. So, you know, there's other channels where you can still hear their voices, but a lot of Americans don't know about it.
No, they don't. And I remember when I first discovered RT, I was like, oh, there's Larry King. I thought he like vanished or he died, or I mean, honestly. And so when I tell people that don't know, I say, you remember Larry King? Yeah, he's on RT.
The establishment never forgave Larry King convincing the American people to push for Ross Perot to be able to be in the presidential debates. After that, they changed the rules. And, you know, they put Jill Stein in chains in 2012 for just showing up at the debates. But, you know, of course, they will never now permit any type of third party or independent person to show up at the debates. And another main reason why is Jesse Ventura. He was polling at like 1 or 2% popularity in Minnesota when he first ran as an independent. And what changed everything, but to make him win by a landslide? The gubernatorial debates, because Ventura is an incredible debater. And so the establishment saw that, and they said no more independents at the state or federal level running, being able to be in debates. And I'm not saying I'm a fan of Ross Perot, but I like the fact that they let, you know, another voice into the debates. And so, you know, Larry King was part of that. And I think at that point, that's really when they were looking for a way to get rid of Larry King. But, you know, he's still on the air, so.
Right. Well, I think it's a way that they don't want those people in those debates because what they say is going to resonate with the public. You know, it doesn't sound like canned platitudes and stuff. But, you know, about Jill Stein, I was thinking this as I was reading your intro and focusing on election integrity. You know, I never believed the numbers either of what the percentage Jill Stein got across.
Let me tell you this.
There's just no way.
So nationwide, okay, Jill Stein's votes in 2012 versus 2016. This is interesting. Nationwide, she got two times more. But in Florida, she got double that. She got 4 times more. So this myth that in the battleground state, you know, you have to vote the lesser two evils, that doesn't really apply anymore because the youth, including a lot of Bernie-crats, came out for Jill Stein. And I found that was inspiring. You know, it still was less than what Johnson got because Libertarian Party is more established, but it's spectacular how many more votes she got. And like you said, maybe it was even more than 4 times more, right? Because there could have been some, you know, well, and there was a recount effort on behalf of the Greens in a couple different states. But yeah, you make a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely. I know it's just anecdotally, but I just feel like it just doesn't make sense. You hear so many people say they wrote, you know, green and voted green, and then to hear the low numbers, it just, I don't know, it doesn't matter.
When I was with her at the DNC protest, you know, with the Greens, I was with Sherry Honkala. She ran for VP in 2012 with Jill Stein. You know, people were running into the arms of the Greens, and Jill Stein, she was there as well. At the DNC, you know, all these Bernie-crats, you know, there was no way they were going to vote for Hillary at that point. And a lot of them felt betrayed by by Bernie's endorsement of Hillary, and since then have seen things that Bernie's done that's pissed them off. I mean, this glorification of Herbert Walker Bush by Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. A lot of people that said to a lot of people, we don't care. We're not going to vote for him in 2020. There's no way. And I hope those same people can say, well, we're going to vote for Ventura or we're going to vote for Stein, and we don't care if they run as a libertarian. Because look, again, these are labels. You know, if they have a similar platform and they're going to run again. You know, and they haven't proven themselves a sellout, then vote for them, you know.
I think it's encouraging watching the attacks on Beto O'Rourke. I mean, I've always been against Beto O'Rourke. I use the just say no to Beto.
Right?
Yeah, I believe so. I heard that. But
yeah, not a millionaire, a billionaire. So you have she's like of the upper echelons of the elites, part of that. So, you know, and when they asked him the other day if he was progressive, he says, I don't know if I'm progressive. Seriously? Like,
yeah, at least no, all you have to do is look at his record and look at the fact that, I mean, he didn't even support Bernie. He came out later and supported Hillary.
But Gillum, and I was part of Gillum's campaign, so I don't want to be a hypocrite here, but Gillum, when he ran down here in Florida, you know, he admitted, because this is what I liked about him. He was very honest, you know. So he said, Bernie had no reason to endorse me. I support Hillary Clinton. But I think Gillum moved more to the left at that point. You know, later on, he demoralized his base, met with Wasserman Schultz, and made his losing inevitable. We know that. But before that, in the beginning, you know, Trump was saying, you're a socialist mayor from Tallahassee. And he's like, well, call me whatever you want. Bernie Sanders is backing me now. And that was a good strategy now. When he was convinced by the right-wing Democrats to go the other way, that's what ruined it. But it looked like in the beginning, Gillum was stepping away from the Clintonites and embracing Bernie, and that was going to be a win for him. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I know for the Any Blue Will Do crowd, it freaks them out to see Gillum lose. But to me, I see that and seeing Beto lose and go, no, not good enough. I mean, you're not going to
trying to get Bernie's endorsement. So Beto was a different case, but
they just thought he could run that just like against Trump. That Ted Cruz is just so bad that people are going to come out and vote for Beto.
Well, let me tell you something about Ted Cruz. Okay, so again, I'm of the left. I'm no fan of Ted Cruz.
Right,
you know, I
me either.
He's an immigrant himself, and so he's very hypocritical. But at least he had the integrity in the RNC to refuse to endorse Trump, right? So at that level, you have to have some respect for the guy. But other than that, no. I mean, probably Beto would have been better than Ted Cruz. But it's like, why do we have to keep picking between the lesser two evils? Why can't we let independent third-party people into the debates so the American people can see them?
Well, I think if you just see the reaction on social media, people just aren't buying it anymore. And I think that's really encouraging. I mean, I saw even David Sirota, who's a journalist I respect a lot. He has been attacked just for reporting facts on Beto. I don't know all the details of who all it was, but he's just being attacked for it because they're hoping to just pass it off. It's like, you know, oh, another Obama type will work. And I think people are just fed up. So
well, you know what? The Russiagate exists, and the Russiagate that exists and all the abundance of evidence that shows that exists is showing the Clintons' Uranium One deal, which even the New York Times reported on, and Jill Stein's talked about this at length as well. You know, a third of our uranium, which is used to build nuclear weapons, in a pay-for-play deal with the Clinton Foundation, with Putin, that's a fact. There's a direct link between Putin, you know, and the money that was received in the Clinton Foundation and the uranium deal that was made.
And what role did Mueller?
Smoke screen, and no defense of Trump, but a lot of this Russiagate is a smokescreen because actually the evidence that's there is showing the Democrat link with Russia. Right.
It's like projecting on what they did onto him. But do you have? I don't remember the details specifically, but I think it was in WikiLeaks. But didn't Mueller play more of a role in the Uranium One deal? That he did something else, and I can't remember the details now. But I'll have to look it up maybe while you guys are talking.
Yeah, but a lot of these same people that are pointing a finger, they were involved in some shady business, and that's actually evidence on that end. It kind of reminds me with Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, because Dilma Rousseff, and Chomsky said this as well, you know, his wife's Brazilian. Dilma Rousseff, you know, she was probably the least dirty out of all the political figures in Brazil. She was deposed for corruption, and the people that were prosecuting her, you know, these fascists, you know, a lot of them were corrupt themselves. And now you have an open Nazi pretty much who's in power in Brazil. It's very sad. But Mexico, you know, the progressives are on the rise there. That's good. The Cuban doctors that were thrown out of Brazil, they're going to go to Mexico now. That's great. I'm probably going to touch a little bit on history and the history of political history of countries internationally in my book, because it's important for Americans to know that. The main audience is going to be Americans. I might want to translate this one to Spanish like I did prior, but Americans, we feel isolated, exceptional. That's not what revolutionary libertarianism is supposed to be about. We have to see the history and the recent history of nations and the things that we cause, or at least our government or the government, however you want to put it, caused. All the interventions, at least since the 1950s in Central America. Go back to Guatemala. You go back to Nicaragua, El Salvador in the 80s, or of course 2009, Hillary masterminded the coup against Zelaya, an elected progressive in Honduras, just like she masterminded Libya and caused open air slavery. So, the Clinton mob or the Clinton, they always were the hawks of the Democrats, and so this is a direct result of the so-called caravan. Not to get off topic, but these refugees, they're leaving as a direct result of U.S. policies. And Joe Stein pointed this out. In exchange, you have children dying in these concentration camps known as ICE centers.
Well, I think as people turn away, especially younger people, turn more and more away from the corporate media and go out on their own, whether it's, the Zen Education Project or YouTube or your book or whatever, and they go in search of it themselves, you learn a very different history. I mean, I know I'm trying to do some of that with my daughter, and she's like, why aren't we taught this in school? Like, well, I was showing her. And
want to talk about Assange, it's not so much he's trying to be a revolutionary, but you have to hear Orwell's quote, a quote that Canova always says when he speaks in almost every speech. Speaking the truth in a world of universal deceit is a revolutionary act. We are in the time of deceit, but we're also in a time of rebellion against the lies. And simply by showing the truth in the emails brilliantly, like WikiLeaks and Assange has done, they've turned into heroes and revolutionaries. That might have not been their intention, but they could bring about or inspire that revolutionary change by showing the real things that are going on behind the scenes.
Right, and I just saw a tweet. There was a video. They had put out candles in front of the embassy, and it just said, "Courage is contagious." And I think that's very true, because if you look at what's happened over the last 2 years, more and more of us are becoming vocal and linking up with each other in different ways online and stuff. And it is becoming, I think it is contagious just to speak out, because I think so many people, as I was saying before we went live, I think just sort of self-police, whether, their own, like, they might not even look at something about what really happened with JFK. Oh, that's crazy. Conspiracy stuff, and they wouldn't even look at it, because
the work that I'm sitting in now probably has more space than what Assange has in the embassy. He's cramped up in the embassy for years. They even took his cat away. Incommunicado. He couldn't speak to his family for several months. This is just a form of psychological torture, what he's going through. And of course, you won't hear about this in the mainstream media. Right. I mean, but this guy, clearly for showing the truth, he's paying high consequences for that right now.
Absolutely. And speaking of sort of reaching across, to other sides and dropping labels, and speaking of Assange, there's a woman that I met at one of the Assange rallies in D.C. She goes by Angel Fox on Twitter, and I know she's very right-wing. I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but she's over there right now, like, just by herself out in front of the embassy. So I think, we should applaud people that do that. No matter.
I shared something about that from your page earlier, and I commend her. The thing is, what motivates, I don't want to speak to her, I don't know this particular individual, but what motivates a lot of the right wing, like, for example, Fox News, right? So Canova reached out to everybody. He reached out to MSNBC, CNN, all the main channels, when Brenda Snipes was fired or forced to resign, however you want to look at it.
Finally.
So when he was vindicated, and you think he'd be on the front page of every paper saying, I was the guy that revealed this over a year ago, the only place that let him on was Fox News. And they were trying to criticize Canova for that. Are you serious?
Right, right. Call him MAGA and stuff.
He wanted to only go on Fox News. He was trying to go to every media outlet. And they were the only ones who spoke to him. And why? Because their motivations are different. They say, oh, look, here's this Democrat, Brenda Snipes. Let's make her look bad. But you know what should motivate journalists is truth.
Yes.
Regardless of what label that the individual takes that they're going to interview, they should use their voice for truth, not for political points.
Well, I think maybe. Sorry, we're taking over here. Do you want the invisible black box here? Do you want to speak more?
I am perfectly fine right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I think, it is monetary. I mean, the reason we don't have good investigative journalists is because it doesn't pay. But thankfully, I think what we've got now is people that have just become so passionate about it, they can't stand it anymore to just sit back and not do anything.
You know what? If they could donate millions of dollars on a GoFundMe to increase a wall, they say build a wall, the wall's already there, to increase the wall, so the more people die on the border. If they can collect millions by doing that, I don't know why the people can't crowdfund or something to be able to support trips of investigative journalists,
True.
Wherever they're doing it.
Yeah, but I think more and more people are just doing it on their own time and doing it, on their own because courage is contagious, maybe. We can hope. So what do you see going forward? You think Ventura and Jill Stein, you think that's a real possibility for a ticket?
The reason why I see them as good leaders is not so much that they help people become aware, because I think the overwhelming majority of the American population, or at least the youth, are very aware, probably more aware than we've ever been. The internet age, and again, the youth no longer looks at the corporate media. So it's not that we're not aware, we're very aware. The problem is lack of inspiration. So the passivity as a result of that lack of, or complacency, as a result of that lack of inspiration, has resulted in people feeling powerless when we're in this so-called democratic society. So leaders or activists, their main goal or motivation should be to inspire others to act on behalf of truth and justice. People like Jesse Ventura and Jill Stein have been fighting for that for a long time.
I think that a lot of the apathy it's become voter apathy. I mean, when you see what's been going on, you can see what's just happened in Broward County alone, but it's all across the country. I've been talking to this statistician guy recently who...
I suffered voter suppression twice.
Have you?
My vote for Canova, they haven't been able to verify that it was counted. And also, when I tried to vote in a primary, because I'm an independent, but I temporarily changed my registration to Democrat, they claimed I was still independent, even though I did it well in advance. This is how they suppress the vote, because they know that independents in that area would vote for, candidates. Canova's district, I would say about 90% of the independents in the district are former Democrats. It's almost the same amount as independents and Democrats in the district, and only about 23% Republican. Even Canova himself is an independent who was formerly a Democrat. So I know the district very well. I was registered in it. I voted for him. I don't know if my vote was counted. But yeah, a lot of these independents, they're former Democrats, and a lot of them would be willing to go libertarian or work with libertarians. And hopefully they don't let labels prevent them from doing that. Hopefully, literature, like my book that's going to come out sometime next year, and also activism and protests, and will inspire others to act on what they already know, because we're very aware. I'm not saying don't continue the efforts to make people aware, but what's more important is for people to be inspired. And more important than any political campaign is movement building. That's essential.
Right. Power in numbers. So what you said how many books have you written?
10.
10. So, wow. Okay.
So I can't even finish 2 fan fictions.
Well, you know what? It's funny you say that, because I've always wanted to write a fiction, but all my books so far have been nonfiction. To write a fiction is the challenge,
So where can people find your books?
They're on Amazon.
Oh, no. No, I'm just kidding. I know it's unavoidable, isn't it? We have to do something about that.
You can find me a publisher.
You had us up to Amazon.
Besides Amazon.
I love the way Pat the Burner, Peter Douche, God, he has so many names. Says that. He has a book down, though. Yeah, I've got it right here. Wait, this one. He says he had it available one way. I don't know. I got it directly from
the name. Inconvenient Douche.
Yeah.
The Inconvenient Truth.
Yeah. Have you seen this? Oh my God! Please, follow him on. I'm always plugging.
And the books will pop up probably from Amazon. Al R Suarez, A-L and then R and then S-U-A-R-E-Z. And R is the middle initial, no period. and they should pop up like Solidarity for Agriculture, like an occupier, and then the latest one I'm working on is Revolutionary Libertarianism, which hopefully will be out in the spring next year at some point.
Wow.
But yeah, I write a lot about like cultural and like contradictions within U.S. society, and I've written 3 semi-biographical works. 2 of them were political.
So what's your story going back? Wait, how
when I
old?
lived in Europe, I was very political. That's why, because well, I was only a teenager when I lived in South America, but I was still involved with politics somewhat then. But
Wow.
having lived abroad, and I think that you know, if the state wants to pay for anything, they should pay for every high school graduate to live abroad a year, because it's so educational to live abroad.
I don't think they really want that. That's the problem.
Well, of course, the current system wants the youth to not know other cultures, because they want the youth to feel that they're exceptional and not realize all the lack of rights that they have in comparison to Europe and even Latin America.
Yep.
You know, you can get health care without having to go in debt in Cuba and Venezuela, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and so many countries that are even developing.
Oh,
And as well, in the Bahamas, I found out recently when I traveled there, they have public health care. So, and if all these countries, and in Europe and in Russia, they have access to health care, why do we have to go in debt to get health care even till now, or get educated? You know, when these other nations have been able to reach these rights. So it is important to travel and to know. And one thing's to read, and it's important to read, but to go and to know other cultures is also important.
The irony of all this is that because thanks to the internet, we do know a lot of this, and we are stuck here wallowing in depression at that realization.
But, you know, speaking of healthcare, I said this earlier today because just of what I'm dealing with personally with another change and a transition in health insurance and all of the mess with that. And recently some candidates that I interviewed right before the election, they were both in Louisiana, I believe, and like told some stories of people that died, you know, having to quarter their insulin. And you know, I think that's really going to become the issue.
And these are people that were working. I've heard cases of people that were working, but not getting enough, and they were forced to reduce the amount of medicine, and then they died. I mean, literally, the system is killing people.
So I think that it may very well. That's the thing that gets me probably the angriest, because you're talking, it's life and death for some people, and it's just exorbitant costs. And I think that, and it's also. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on with that issue. It's affecting everybody. So I think that as that continues to get worse, no thanks to Obamacare. Sorry. But
Obamacare was another reformist compromise that ultimately made things worse. Even the, what was it, the Fifth Amendment that abolished slavery, it had a little reformist clause in there that said, unless convicted under the law. So right now it's legal, even if you were convicted of a misdemeanor, to be enslaved. And you have more people of color right now in the United States in its entire history that are enslaved and are literally forced to work for nothing or for 1 cent a day, including as firefighters in California, where they can't get those jobs when they get out as ex-felons. But you have people that are literally enslaved, and it's worse than when it was in the 1860s, prior to the abolishment of slavery, only in the shadows because they're behind bars. That's where reformism is. You want to talk about Clinton reformism? Let me get in this real quick, because we've got to wrap it up soon, because I was saying, you know, half hour, it's been about an hour. Great topics. Like, for example, the military, don't ask, don't tell, right? That was a Clintonite reform. I spoke to a woman who was a sergeant, lesbian, and her subordinate found out that she was lesbian and said, I'm going to reveal what I know about you unless you have relations with her. And she relented and was coerced to have sex with this guy. But yeah, I mean, you've had cases like that as a result of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was a quote-unquote compromise. Thank God that's been reversed. But essentially what reformism does, not like revolutionary politics, but what reformism does in the long run, because you always have to look at the long run, it can make things even worse.
True. So what do you think? Are we going to have to see violence in the street? I mean, what's your take?
JFK, you know, JFK said, those that make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Right. So it's not me advocating this. It's just knowing history.
Well, I mean, we see with the yellow vests.
You know, Occupy, you know, elections and so many other movements. Then, but again, we have to keep trying, you know. What can we do?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, well, the Yellow Vest movement, I mean, that's...
Oh, I love those guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
I might not agree with their entire platform, but I love that they're uniting people. And I love the French in general, that they rebel and shut down the government. The government's actually fearful of them, hence their tyranny. I mean, that's a thing out there.
Well, there was a woman that just, the one that really got me was this woman that stood there and then just dropped to her knees, and she was just screaming like, I can't afford Christmas for my kids. I can't, do this. I work this many jobs.
Is a Trump surrogate who's looked out for the rich and went back in his campaign pledges. And you don't do that to the French. They're not passive people. They will shut the country down. My friend was flying to France recently, had to divert to Spain because of the protests. And she wasn't even flying to Paris. She was flying to a town in the south of France. But these protests are going on throughout the nation, and I think they're inspirational.
Yeah,
of course, the media's not talking about, the blame stream again. But, go on the internet, see the truth about the Yellow Vest. It's quite inspirational.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't even have cable anymore. So does anyone know? Is there anything being covered about the Yellow Vest movement in the mainstream media? Anyone know?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. They probably want to keep that under wraps as long as possible. But I saw something very encouraging.
We can't waste time to talk about some Frenchmen in bicycle vests. Well, we need to talk about the resistee.
Yeah, the resistance.
Right. Sure. But no, there was a guy.
I cannot believe I made an Invader Zim reference with this entire podcast.
There was a guy in the American.
I also host a podcast now. It's called Vanguard Youth Radio out of Blog Talk Radio, and we're going to have a show tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be debating a Zionist over the whole BDS issue. I'm not afraid to say my view on that, because talking about nonviolence, right? I mean, BDS is a nonviolent tactic. It's a legitimate tactic. It's been effective. It was effective against the South African regime. It's not anti-Semitic. Jill Stein's Jewish. She supports BDS. So it's ridiculous to say that. And yeah, there should be an interesting debate on that tomorrow.
Okay, you said 6:30 p.m.?
Yeah. Okay. If you Google Vanguard Youth Radio, Blog Talk Radio.
Okay, I'll put a post down below our thing.
Yeah, I'll Facebook message you the link to the show too, so you can share it with your.
Okay, very cool. Yeah,
but thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I think this is the future. I think really just all these discussions that everyone can have. We just start talking outside of corporate media, and I think more and more people are paying attention, which is a great thing. So, always happy to host anyone wanting to have a good conversation. So. Thanks for coming on. And so you said your book will be out next year?
Yeah, sometime next year, maybe by like the latter part of the spring. And, my hope for the new year, my resolutions for revolution, you could say, for that revolutionary change that we're fighting for that unity towards that new society.
Yes. Okay. Thank you guys both.
Peace.
All right. Bye. Good night.